Greetings, everyone. Hope all of you are having an absolutely fantastic day. Yesterday, the early access for Greedfall 2 released, and I did a video on that, link down in the description. As part of that video, I informed some of you that Spider Studios is currently going through a labor dispute, and that I had only recently received confirmation of that, and I had no further information, but we would do a video at a later time where I would be able to provide you all with clarification about what's going on. And today I am comfortable doing that. So let's go ahead and dive in. Now we're going to start with an IGN article. Greedfall 2 developers are going on strike. Alleged studio management treats workers like galley slaves. Don't know what a galley slave is? Well, neither did I. You learn something new every day. A galley is a large boat that requires a large number of people to row in order for it to be able to move. A galley slave was usually a prisoner of war or a criminal who was essentially chained to the area where they were expected to work and would oftentimes have to work in the midst of their own waste rowing for this large boat. Once this person expired, if the master was feeling merciful, they would slit the person's throat first, then throw them overboard. But for masters who were merciless, they would just throw the slave overboard afterwards and let them drown. Yikes. Again, you learn something new every day. So Greedfall 2's developers are alleging that they're being treated like galley slaves, rowing and rowing, working and working with no clear direction and no idea when this horror is going to end. Do they have a point? Well, let's get into the article and talk about it. There's an update here, but let's go ahead and get into the meat of the story first. There are chapters down below, so if you all have already read the base story, then you can move on to the next chapter. But I know a lot of you weren't aware that this was happening at all, so I figured you'd want to have the original details. So this story broke out on August 28th, and it lets you know that the developers of upcoming Greedfall 2 are going on strike in protest of Spider's management. An open letter was signed by half of the staff to studio management, including its CEO. And keep in mind, Spiders is owned by publisher Nacon. This open letter details several years of known problems, which have been greatly amplified over the past year with the arrival of the current head of the company. Instability, opposition to anticipating problems and securing working conditions, global mismanagement, turnover and recruitment problems, unacceptable delays in achieving gender equality and parity, important lack of transparency, denial of problems, refusal to acknowledge worker representation, and blocked negotiations. Adding even more detail to Greedfall 2's impact on worker relations, they allege it has suffered a difficult production and there is widespread anxiety and a loss of interest among employees. More specifically, the staff said they have suffered significant crunch working on the game. Now, anybody who follows video games knows what crunch means, right? It means that workers, or developers rather, are being forced to work holidays, work nights, work weekends, massive amounts of time taken away from their families in order to get this game out the door. Crunch is a term that has a lot of negative baggage with it in the gaming sphere. Now, I've definitely come to see crunch as a representation of mismanagement. You have not properly managed the amount of time it would take to actually complete this game. So to make up for that, you are putting undue stress and pressure upon the devs who are responsible for creating the game. Now, for very, very small studios, some level of crunch probably is unavoidable, right? Because you're dealing with so few resources in order to be able to get things done. But even though Greedfall is not a AAA game, it's certainly a AA game, and they've had quite a lot of time in order to be able to develop Greedfall 2. So I don't feel that crunch especially in this early stage. The game isn't expected for another year or so. Especially at this stage, I don't feel like crunch is acceptable. And pretty consistently, when we hear crunch being publicly talked about, it's in the vein of developers' lives being negatively impacted. Case in point, the article continues with saying, for many, it translates into a fear of releasing a disappointing game at the end and or a feeling of shame over their own work. For some, it's the last straw that pushes them to look for work elsewhere. Management gives us the impression of treating us like galley slaves in the hold of a ship, rowing on and on without ever knowing the route or the destination of their journey, the workers said. Spiders feels like a ship sailing with no one at the helm. Wow. Unquestionably brutal. There's not a whole lot of guesswork there about how those workers feel. Now, I really appreciate IGN putting out this article and making everybody aware of the situation. I do not appreciate the way IGN handled the response from Spider's management regarding this, right? And let's read it first, and then I'll explain why I feel this is woefully inadequate. So this story broke out on August 28th, and Spider's management put out an update on September 4th. And IGN took out a part of their statement. I'll read it here. So the union publicly relayed allegations against Spider. The false and even defamatory accusations made by them in no way reflect the reality of the day-to-day working life of the company's employees and are an attack on the reputation of the studio. And then it goes on to mention that management is committed to open and constructive social dialogue and that they love their employees, blah, 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 blah. The reason why I really don't like this is because if you only read that portion of their statement, it definitely gives off the impression that, oh yeah, these guys are definitely galley slave masters. These guys, they definitely treat their employees like shit, and they're delivering a whole bunch of fluff to try to get you to look past it. To me, to only take out that section and make that their response makes Spider's management look horrible. And mind you, they might be horrible. Everything that the employees say might actually be true, but at least present an honest representation of how Spiders has decided to respond to what has been said. IGN didn't do that, in my personal opinion. Luckily, if we go over to, what's the name of this? Games Industry Biz, they have a much more comprehensive breakdown on what the response is from Spider's management. And I really, really appreciate that. So Spider shared it. Oh, by the way, I will leave a link to both articles down in the description. So Spider shared an update following a strike. First and foremost, the minimum salary at the French studio will rise 11%. And that's in addition to the salary increases of 6.1% that have been previously voted. Now, mind you, this increase is not directly because of the letter that was sent out or the strike, but it was part of an increase that they were already negotiating, and it was going to take effect. So essentially, they've been going back and forth. The employees are dissatisfied with the speed at which these negotiations are happening, but Spider is doing things. Let me make it clear though, right? They already just had a 6.1% increase, and now they're agreeing to an 11% increase, which I could be wrong, but in my mind says they were providing bargain basement wages beforehand. If the employees can complain and all of a sudden their wages skyrocket 17%, that probably means there were real serious problems, right? But at least we've seen a bunch of companies who workers complain, say that things are terrible, and the response from the company is, we'll kick rocks. We'll find other employees who find these conditions to be acceptable. right? So, of course, this is a French studio. Things work much differently there. But just in general, I do appreciate that there's this communication of the workers making it clear this is unacceptable. And the studio says, you know what, you're right. Let's work to see how we can improve things. Spider also made it clear that it has no intention to change the working arrangements of employees who are currently working remotely full time, as this was one of the workers' demands. Furthermore, it said that it's launching an audit of the working conditions and environment at the studio, including an assessment of psychological risk, which may or may not actually mean anything. Of course, we see companies all the time. They bring in this third party investigator, and then the investigator says, oh, no, everything's fine. Everything that this company is doing is incredible. But at the very least, what I've been listing here is much more substantial than what IGN mentioned in their article. They don't even link to the statement at all. Right. So it just makes it seem like, oh, yes, these people accuse Spider's management of working them like galley slaves. And in return, Spider's management just said, well, they're just a bunch of liars. Like, no, that's not that's not the correct situation. Well, what in the hell? Anyway, that's pretty much all the information I have regarding the labor dispute at this time. Personally, I feel comfortable reporting on things regarding Greedfall 2. I know a couple of you had reached out to me and said that you almost felt like my video about early access was like crossing a picket line, and that I was providing exposure and assisting a studio that was treating its workers like trash. I don't agree. One, the workers are not walking away. They want Greedfall 2 to do well. They want Greedfall 2 to succeed. They want to work for Spiders. They just want Spiders to stop treating them like trash. So to me, there's not it's not a situation where I would stop covering Greedfall 2 or advocate for people to stop supporting Greedfall 2, as opposed to some Ubisoft games or Activision games where folks have been severely harassed and mistreated and had to leave and sue, and where it's become clear that there is a culture of abuse where you have to really look at yourself and make decisions about whether or not you want to support products coming out of such a company. I don't feel that way about Spider Studios. It seems like employers are saying there's some very, very serious labor disputes that are occurring, and we have not been treated in a way that is fair. But it also seems like Spider's management is saying, all right, the jig is up, and we're going to have to do something about this. We're going to have to pay you all much more fairly. We're going to have to give you a lot of concessions regarding the conditions that you've been facing, et cetera, et cetera. This to me doesn't strike me as a type of situation where Big Boss is basically saying, deal with it or kick rocks. Now, if that changes, if it turns out these 44 employees who have made it clear that there are serious situations, if their issues are not satisfied or not addressed, if they feel like the mistreatment continues, especially leading up to Greedfall 2's release, then that's a totally different situation. And frankly, if there's anybody looking at this who is directly involved with the picket line or with this fight, who feels like I'm not covering this properly and you want to reach out to me and give me additional information, I would 100% be open to that. I'd be 100% to interviewing someone who's involved in this on the channel. If you feel like there's a message that needs to get out that is not getting out at this time. But for right now, I'm comfortable with the way that I have handled this. Of course, I'm always open to feedback. So let me know you all's thoughts down in the comments. How do you feel about the situation? Hearing my coverage, seeing their articles, and seeing what's happening with Spiders. Does it change at all your willingness to support Greedfall 2? Did you try Greedfall 2 early access? If so, how do you feel about the current state of the game? The developers have made it pretty clear they feel like the 1-year timeline management has provided as far as when Greedfall 2 will be released is frankly unattainable. And I would probably agree. I think Greedfall 2 looks fantastic in comparison to the original game. I think there's a lot of interesting things there, but it also needs a lot of work, which is what I said in my video yesterday. So I'm curious, how do you all feel about the overall situation? Let me know. I'll see you on the next video. Take care.